Hello and welcome again to another episode of our new podcast, BasiliCAST, which we're really excited to bring to you. We had a very generous parish couple who has made this all possible, and my immensely talented colleagues at the Basilica. And today we're really happy to have Monique Maddox with us, who is a new friend of mine, and we've been working together on our initiative on restorative justice and healing. Monique is our newest advisory board member. And I met Monique through our good mutual friend Julie Craven, with whom Monique serves on the Catholic Community Foundation Board. And I wanted to cover a number of topics with Monique, and I thank her. She's very much busy these days, and I appreciate her generosity of spirit in being with us. But the first thing I just wanted to ask Monique to do is to introduce herself to our audience and talk a little bit about where she grew up. And we're going to get into in just a minute Monique's new role, which is a very vital and important role, and the work that she's doing. And then we'll cover some other areas as well. She was, for 6.5 years, a trustee at Our Lady of Grace, our Marian friends down the road in Edina. And I'll ask her to talk about that work, which is so important, the lay trustee work in the church. And then we'll talk a little bit about a recent experience that we were both part of, Racial Truth and Healing in the Archdiocese. So Monique, welcome. We're delighted that you're here, and if you want to just tell our audience a little bit about who you are and where you grew up and how you came to Minnesota.
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Monique Trusclair Maddox, and I grew up in Maringouin, Louisiana. I am a cradle Catholic. My family has been Catholic for as many generations that we can trace back. I am a descendant of Jesuit enslavement. The Jesuits are the largest religious order of the Catholic Church, and my family was sold in 1838 as a part of a large effort to save the Jesuit mission here in the United States. Many of you may have heard about this as the Georgetown 272. In 2016, when I learned of this history, we thought it was just 272 people that were enslaved and sold, and we have since come to know that that is a much greater history. There were actually 314 men, women, and children that were sold in that particular sale, which was the second largest slave sale in America.
Wow.
And so I ended up here in Minnesota through a job transfer, and I found my new family at Our Lady of Grace in Edina. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Can you tell us how you came to discover your own background related to the enslavement by the Jesuits and how that kind of unfolded?
Yeah, it was Palm Sunday, April 2016. I was leaving Mass, and just as many of you get these, news alerts on your phone that talk about what's happening in the breaking news or in current events, I likewise was a subscriber to the New York Times, and I received an alert on my phone as I left Mass that talked about what does Georgetown owe its descendants of slavery. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I never knew Georgetown owned slaves or had any ties to this history. And so I began to read this article. And then I made my way all the way home, 3 miles away, and said, wow, I need to get on the computer and learn more about this because this is a very interesting article. And I got to the computer, and that's where you see the images that go along with that article. And I see a lady from the place that I grew up in, this town of about 1,000 people, standing in the cemetery where my father's buried. Included in that article was a manifest that listed the names of many of those family members, and it included many of my family members' names. And so I showed that to my mother, and she then, we learned, was her great-grandfather, who was 3 years old at the time on that slave ship. And then she learned another great-grandfather was 10 years old on that slave ship. So while those 314 people were sold, it was really our families that were moved from southern Maryland to Louisiana And we continue the faith that has been written about so well, not just in 2016, but we go back to books about our parish and how the mission of our church started. And it's just so revealing to see how the slaves and on plantation lands kept the faith through that time. So I've been very much rooted in the Catholic faith for all of my life.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the background of how you came to know this information. One of the things with regard to your Catholic faith that I've heard a number of Black Catholic folks that I've gotten to know is how important the Eucharist is. You know, this idea that, you know, all of you have experienced harm and at times injustice, and at times, you know, just being dismissed or unseen, unheard. And, you know, and yet so many have remained, and it's compelling. Can you talk a little bit about your own journey? We're going to go back to the topic of the work that you're doing now, but just your own experience of the Catholic faith and the Eucharist. And I know from you speaking in other forums that it's also provided an opportunity and a source of grace for healing and forgiveness.
You know, the Eucharist has always been something that we've cherished as a family. Missing Mass was like a sin to us. My grandmother had me sit on the first pew, and I couldn't turn to the left or right. I couldn't raise my hand, yawn, or anything. I had to be fixated on that altar. It was like torture, but we were there every Sunday, and so that has stuck with me, not just to attend Mass every Sunday, but to also participate and take the Eucharist. And I grew up in a place that wasn't always welcome. It was the very deep South, and it was a very divided community, and so we always cherished. We always wanted to go to the priest to get communion because we felt like that was a more reverent place to receive it. I then became a Eucharistic minister, and later in my career, and learned that, you know, it is something that is a privilege to give as a lay person as well. Our family absolutely loves the church. We absolutely loves that healing and sense of wholeness that we get from accepting the Eucharist.
That's beautiful. Can you talk about how you have come into this new role and maybe describe the role, the leadership, significant leadership role that you have in responding to that significant generational harm and your work with the Jesuits?
We have, as Descendants, once we learned this history, began to say, what is our response going to be to this history? And we, as Descendants, began as leaders galvanizing and coming together with the Jesuits in a healing circle and a lot of dialogue to say, you know, we got to the point where we said, you committed this sin. You've admitted to committing a sin. You've given an apology, but you can't set the terms of your penance. We are going to lead you there. And how can you as priests look at us in a way that we can fully respect the church and respect all that the church brings to us through you if you can't follow our lead in accepting the penance that we are granting? And so we've offered to create a moral path for this reconciliation. There was no legal suit. There was no legal settlement. What better way to bring the church whole than to have a moral path forward? And so we partner as Descendants with the Jesuits and creating initially a $1 billion foundation. That is our vision. And the Jesuits have committed to the first $100 million of that vision.
Okay. And what is your particular role in that?
Well, if you had asked me 6 months ago what my role was, I was board chair and CEO of this foundation. But I've since realized that I couldn't do this part-time. This is where my heart is. My heart is in making generational impact, not just to our family members, but also to America in the space of truth, racial healing, and transformation. And so I was asked to be the president of this foundation. And that is what I do full time.
Wow.
I go out and speak on this mission. I bring people closer to understanding the truth, whether they are Jesuits or whether they are lay people, whether they are descendants. And so that's what I spend my entire life doing now.
And what does that entail, that work? What are you doing? Are you traveling? Who are you meeting with?
I mentioned the Jesuits, so I do meet with Jesuits in formation, and I meet with Jesuits that are providing guidance to others. There's a Father Timothy Kasicki that I work with every single day, and Father Kasicki says, if you met one Jesuit, you met one Jesuit. Mm-hmm. And so
that's indeed true.
And so it is my privilege to get to minister to Jesuits and getting them to fully understand the depth of this history and meeting descendants who have been harmed through this history. At the same time, I have to meet with descendants who say, can you give me more today? How are you helping me today? So we've created 3 pillars through our foundation. And those 3 pillars are focused on truth, racial healing, and transformation. They also are focused on educational aspirations for descendants. Post-secondary at this time is where we're focused. And then we also want to help our elderly and infirm by giving them housing support as well as emergency medical needs. And I'll go on to say a little bit further about why we chose those pillars.
Okay.
The elderly and infirm was a piece that in the conditions on the sale of our families, the Jesuits promised to keep our families together. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen. Mm-hmm. They also promised to care for the elderly and the infirm. That didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And so through that, we said, you've harmed our families, you've broken us apart. We're still trying to learn who all the descendants are. Mm-hmm. We want to honor those people, and so we want to give some special care to those elderly and infirm by providing, whether it's weatherization, whether it's door widening, whether it is grab bars, making their homes accessible so they could live in dignity within their homes. And then the youth, we want to be able to help them give an opportunity for them to have an increased base of income, as well as be able to support themselves on a grander scale.
That's wonderful. What you describe in setting forward a moral pathway that you all would lead in terms of this is what we need is very consistent with restorative justice. And, you and I both do that work on the Initiative on Restorative Justice and Healing. The work that you're doing is so rooted in restoration. And it's the idea that those who have been harmed and the generational harm have needs in justice for restoration and know better what particular needs have to be accounted for and attended to. And I think it just is beautiful that you all are coming forward, and you have such a gracious manner and style and such a strength of character that I've come to know and really admire, that you're able to lead in that way, and when you do get pushback, to say no and to repeat, this is what we need and this is why. How has that been met? As you mentioned, Father Tim, I think it's Tim. Mm-hmm. That's correct. It says a true thing. It's actually true of diocesan priests as well. When you met one diocesan priest, you've met one diocesan priest. What has been the Jesuit response? I would imagine it's been mixed. But are you feeling like you're making some headway?
Jesuits are excited to meet me. They are excited to say, I've met a descendant. This is the first time I've met a descendant. And I say to them, this history is the first time I've met a Jesuit. Jesuits didn't come to Louisiana with us, with our families. So we had to learn the principles that our family of Ignatian that was sent down to Louisiana with us. We carried those forward. As our family members were loaded onto the ships and handed rosary beads, which has been widely documented, they prayed for themselves, they prayed for salvation, they prayed to God, and that's what they were told to do. And so the grace that I show is what has been rooted in me throughout my life. It's what our families have had. to endure, that we show the resilience of taking something that is so gravely hurtful and being able to speak about it. And not everybody can speak about it.
Sure.
It's a pain that, I tell Father Tim, I don't know if I'll ever be able to say this forever. It may come to a point where I'm just exhausted of it.
Right.
But that's the beauty. As long as I'm able to speak it and talk about it, I'm willing to talk about it. So I'm teaching Jesuits and I'm teaching Descendants as well. Just as I taught in our parish in Our Lady of Grace and parishes before this, I did youth ministry, and I've done some adult faith formation as well. And so happy to share my gifts. We don't know what our gifts always are, but this is a gift that I've been granted.
There's no doubt about that. Can you talk a little bit, if you're open to it, how you worked through some of the emotional and spiritual kind of tumult, just the harm and what you personally experienced? Because that had to have been really acute, and probably there's remaining dimensions of that. If you're open to just sharing a little bit about how you kind of work through some of the harm, generational harm, personally.
As you know, in restorative justice, we have to talk through, and through dialogue. That is in sharing and dialogue. That is how healing happens. For me, it began with adoration. I had to go before the Blessed Sacrament and say, God, what is this burden that you are casting on me and on our family? Is this the right time for us to deal with this? I don't know, but I leaned on God for guidance there. And week after week, I went to adoration saying, am I through with this? Am I healed? Is this the right? Do I have any more grief that I'm dealing with? Whenever you experience trauma and hurt, you go through many cycles of grief, whether it's death, whatever the harm is. I had to process through all of that. Once I learned this history, it was, it's a shock. And then after you get over the shock, you say, what next? And then it was prayer. There's nothing I could have done that is greater than praying about this and leaning on my faith. So going to adoration truly helped me get through this. Praying for those priests who harm my families. I didn't want to just carry a burden. That's why God is there, to relieve us of those burdens. So once I said, I'm free of this burden, God, your will be done. And once his will is done, there's nothing more I need to do but just float along the way.
Right.
And that's where I am.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I was struck by the timing of when you read on Palm Sunday. So going into Holy Week, and the reading of the Passion. I've actually in the last number of years have just listened to the Passion. I don't read just because I try to absorb it on Palm Sunday and Good Friday, and it prepares me for my own preaching and entrance into the Triduum. But we're also, God says, and Jesus says, I will walk with you. But he also invites us to give our suffering and crosses to him. And the fact that you were entering into Holy Week, and I'm sure Holy Week since 2016 have been an invitation to really unite your suffering with the suffering of Christ. And I don't know if you have a word or two that you want to say about that, but it just the probably providential timing of that Palm Sunday entrance into what has now been 8 years of moving through this.
And I can't tell you if it's been 8 years that it pained me to go through those readings.
Sure.
But it has been with me for some time to say, crucify him. It hurts me. It hurts me to my core because I feel like, who am I to condemn? Who am I? And so that's the piece that I have to give up. So sometimes I do sit out saying some of the parts of the readings because it is hurtful. It is a time where you are giving up, but we come on the other side of that and we say, wow, this is something beautiful. And so that's the beauty of Easter, is to see that resurrection. And I feel like through this history, there is a God and there is a resurrection that we can all celebrate.
Yeah, amen to that. You and I recently took part in a racial truth and healing event in April in the Archdiocese. And, I found it very, very profound. You were one of the panelists. Our friend Cynthia Bailey-Mans did a beautiful job in her keynote, and she's done global work in the Universal Synod. But do you want to just talk about that experience? Archbishop Hebda was there. He's been a real leader in restorative justice and humble and vulnerable, too, in terms of sharing his own experiences. Maybe you could just give a bit of a recap and maybe what you hope for this Archdiocese.
It was a great time where Catholics could come together, especially Black Catholics, where we talk about the harms that we've experienced within this own Archdiocese. Going back to the killing of George Floyd, and what that was like, and the repeated harms over the years that Black Catholics have experienced. All of those are traumas for people to have to heal from. Sitting in healing circles allows you proximity to others, to be able to hear and listen and learn and heal together. Those are the components that we found so profound. How do we go out and speak our truth? I often tell people in this work, take these messages home and have them in your own homes, around tables that are within your own safe space. Tell everybody when you go to your home what you learned today, and be able to have that dialogue in that safe space. No one has to know you're having that dialogue, but it helps others be more comfortable with the conversation. And if they go to another table, they can have that conversation within that table. People are so afraid of going on a national stage, or what they feel is a large stage, whether it's in their own parish, whether it is at the Synod. They're so afraid of what others are going to think about how they feel. If you start this work in your own homes, and then expand that outside of your homes with one person at your table, taking that to someone else, then that mission and that circle becomes bigger and bigger, and it doesn't feel as overwhelming to you.
That's great. I am thinking that I'm going to integrate that into my own teaching and the approach to restorative justice. I remember one time our family, and this was not what our family would do, but we went around the table on Thanksgiving and just talked about what we were thankful for. And it was so beautiful hearing my siblings, one brother who has diabetes, talk about what he was grateful for, my own father. And I think we can, we believe in the Catholic faith that in the domestic church, the church begins at home. And so that sort of intimate sharing about your hopes and dreams, your challenges on a daily or weekly basis, that can then have positive ripple effects outward. And I just think that there's so much potential. One of the things I talked about at the event was the dynamism of restorative justice and Catholic social teaching, because they're both prophetic, they're both oriented to personal and communal healing. The principles of Catholic social teaching, the dignity of the human person, solidarity, the common good, the preferential option for the poor and vulnerable, all really speak and work well with the values of restorative justice. And the other thing we said is that if we can heal, you were the first one to say this at the event, and then I kind of piggybacked on it, if we can heal and build up our Catholic communion in the United States, we have the potential as a leaven to help heal this really wounded country of ours. We're 1/4 of the population. Of course, there's Republicans, Democrats, Independents, but if we behave and act and live our lives in a manner consistent with what Jesus taught us, just think of the positive impact that Catholics could have, including in the area of restorative justice and Catholic social teaching. Any thoughts about that?
I absolutely agree, and that's why we chose a moral path for this foundation, is because when something is broken, you want to heal it. What better way to show that there's been a harm? But I hear who's been harmed, the enslaved and the descendants of the enslaved, come together arm in arm and say, look at what we have done together. That's a great power. Now, each person has to do that work on their own. It's not just, Monique as the president of the Descendants Foundation doing this for descendants. Every descendant has to do this work on their own. And likewise for the Society of Jesus. Every Jesuit has to do this work on their own to come in to know one another and be able to have some dialogue and walk together to show the world what better way to show healing and what the church teaches. This is what the church teaches.
Right.
How do we not get behind that?
Right, exactly. And it's what Jesus wants. It's what the Holy Spirit wants. I want to turn now to a different topic, and then I'll come back at the end with one final question related to our shared work. You had served as a lay trustee. So there's 2 lay trustees of every parish in the diocese, and they make up, along with the pastor and the archbishop and the vicar general, a corporate board. I don't know how widespread this is. I know that in the upper Midwest, this is certainly in Minnesota is part of our structure. I think it's wonderful that lay trustees share in the governance of our parishes, as they do in our archdiocese as well. I hope that proliferates throughout the country, because I think it can be a push against what can be sometimes clericalism and a more myopically focused church governance, which doesn't allow the gifts of really talented lay people like yourself. Maybe just describe that work and what you took from it. What was that experience? Of course, you were working with a very dynamic and likable pastor and Father Kevin Finnegan, who is collaborative by nature and loves to mix it up with all sorts of people. Maybe just describe your work as a trustee, which is now completed.
Yeah, I was trustee of Our Lady of Grace Parish in Edina for 6.5 years. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I became a trustee at a vulnerable time for our archdiocese. It was at a time when we were in conversations around bankruptcy. So those conversations were really intense. We had a lot of prayer guided sessions where we talk about making sure we keep Jesus first in that. But my business experience is really what was really beneficial through that. Helping the pastor be a sounding board for what it is that those decisions were that he was looking to make. Now, we didn't make decisions around a lot of the ministries alone. We didn't guide the hiring of people within the parish. We may interview people when asked. We also attended finance council meetings. We attended parish council meetings. There was endowment committee meetings. There were lots of meetings as a trustee. But that all let us know what the life of the parish was about, to be able to help advise the pastor on the best decisions. And then we also had signatory authority within our own archdiocese. Anything over $25,000 required a trustee's signature. And so those were some accountability that the lay members of the parish had, so that it wasn't just the pastor who was making the decisions that were really important in a parish life.
Right. Yeah, that's it. The lay trustees have been such a great gift, and I've talked to Father John Bauer, my predecessor here, who's now at Our Lady of Lourdes, where I was pastor. And there's something amazing that happens, even more than parish finance council members or parish council members. It's like our experience, and I talked to other brother priests, it's like God chooses the lay trustees who we choose. But it's like God chooses these people, and we just go, okay. And the reason I say that is I have worked with an extraordinary group of parish trustees at St. Peter in North St. Paul, St. Edward, where I was just there 6 months, in West Bloomington, Our Lady of Lourdes, and now here at the Basilica, where we have Tom Paul and Susan Link. They're terrific. Susan's a lawyer. Tom was a very successful executive at United Health. And the amount of wisdom they bring, and humanity, and the sounding board that you talked about, they're dealing with all sorts of complex issues. They're accessible. I just think it's a great model, and I thank you for your service. I'm sure you were terrific, and and I hope that God will continue raising up wonderful trustees in the church. I want to just end by asking you a question. And then ask you, for any closing thoughts that you have. When we were looking to invite you to join our advisory board, so our initiative on restorative justice and healing launched in September of 2021 in the middle of the pandemic. We've had a terrific group of advisory board members, and from all over the country. And you had gotten to know Julie Craven, and we had lunch together, and I said, boy, Monique would be terrific, but I thought you would say no. You're very busy. You and Julie are on the Catholic Community Foundation board, and we give Ann Cullen Miller, whose great uncle was one of the first pastors of the Basilica, a shout out, because the event that we were talking about would not have happened without right. Ann's really vital leadership on our Catholic Restorative Justice Catholic Coalition for Racial Justice. Tell me why you said yes. You delighted and surprised both Julie and me, and we're just so happy you're part of our initiative.
I feel like I have a voice to share in this space. You mentioned the calm that comes with it. All of that is through prayer. Mm-hmm. I'm very reflective, and so through that, I'm able to think through where we can best meet the needs of people. Mm-hmm. This initiative that you and Julie and others invited me to participate in is one where I feel like we have an opportunity to go on a global scale mm-hmm. and be able to share the good news around restorative justice, racial healing, and it's another vehicle for me to share those gifts that I've been afforded with this group. And so I was happy to join and be able to meet more people in this work. It takes a village, and yep. So I thank you for inviting me into your village, yeah. And I welcome you into my village.
Great. Monique was part of a fantastic panel. We had the first in-person National Catholic Restorative Justice Conference that IRJH hosted along with the Catholic Mobilizing Network, and Monique was on a terrific panel that was moderated by Dr. Yohuru Williams, mm-hmm. Archbishop Fobb, who was one of your first pastors That's in right. Louisiana, who's now Archbishop of Louisville. He was on the panel. It was a terrific conversation. Samuel Torres, and so we'll put up the link to that panel as well.
Father Dan, if you could share why you began this work of restorative justice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. In 2013, I was asked to be delegate for Safe Environment in the Archdiocese. And I remember the date that I began, August 15th, 2013, and I've had a strong Marian devotion for a number of years as a priest. And when I got the letter and I saw that date, I kind of thought, this is going to be more complex than the Blessed Mother has her hands in calling me into that work, and it was a really tumultuous time for the Archdiocese. You had referenced the bankruptcy, and we ended up having a very challenging time. We had a number of resignations in the diocese. There was news reports of multiple missed red flags with regard to a former priest who went on to abuse minors. We entered into bankruptcy. We were criminally charged by Ramsey County. Archbishop Nienstedt resigned. And then Archbishop Hebda came in 2015, and we both know him as a friend, and he's a humble leader. We had a number of terrific, good people in the Archdiocese, Tim O'Malley, Susan Mulheron, and then John Choi, the county attorney of Ramsey County, and I think a providential move, put 2 restorative justice provisions in the settlement agreement with the Archdiocese, in part because he had been talking to Hank Shea, who's our faculty fellow on our IRJH at St. Thomas. And what happened is, the work of healing and restoration in the diocese began to happen. And God puts the right pieces in place. The experience I had in 2013 and 14 was really challenging. All the more challenging it was for victim survivors of clergy abuse. But I remember where I was when I was reading files. I remember just seeing the mistakes that we had made, the red flags that we had missed, the harm that people had experienced. And I was happy to move out of that work, and I don't think a priest should be a delegate for Safe Environment. It should be a lay professional like Tim and Paul Iovino, who's in that role now with all sorts of experience that's germane to their work. But then what happened, Monique, to your question, is what I believe is God's providence. We did a pilot parish program in the Archdiocese in response to that settlement agreement, and there were 3 parishes that were asked to pilot restorative justice programming. Our Lady of Lourdes, where I was pastor at the time, Basilica of St. Mary, where I am now, and St. Joseph the Worker in the western suburbs. And I ended up being open to the work of restorative justice, and then felt a call within a call. Just like God had called you to the work that you're doing, I can remember where I was. I went on a short retreat where I really felt the call to get more into this work formally. I then came back and talked with Archbishop Hebda, and he's always so consultative. We prayed about it for a number of months, and then he appointed me in 2019 as the first liaison for restorative justice and healing, along with Paula Kempfer, who does that work as well. So it's been beautiful work. It led to the initiative on restorative justice and healing. Rob Vischer, who was at this event, the University of St. Thomas president, he's a very smart fellow. He said, focus on the areas that you know, because I was looking at doing some writing, and he said, do the work and the study and the writing consistent with the experiences that you've had. And so then I've done some writing in this work, and that led to the launch of the initiative. So I see God's providence in the work in the Archdiocese and the work at St. Thomas, now the Catholic Racial Justice Coalition that many of us are part of. So I appreciate the question, and I'm thankful for that call within a call. And the last thing I'd say is to be able to come to Basilica, and with Janice Anderson and Melissa and Johan and other colleagues really fully embracing restorative justice here in the parish. There's been a great synergy between the two.
I have one other question for you.
Sure.
How do we increase the number of people who believe in this restorative justice mission?
Boy, it's a great question. The event that we were recently at hopefully can show the positive ripple effects of restorative justice. I have to say we've got a significant knowledge gap that we have to overcome. I would love if priests of the Archdiocese in their study day would take up this topic. I've asked for that. Because what happens is people prejudge it like I did. They think it's soft, ethereal, new age. It's actually not. And I learned that through experience. Lawyers and priests are the most skeptical that I've found when we talk about restorative justice, and I'm one of each. To your question, I think the more programming we can do, the more, usually the folks that you get in the room are the ones whose hearts are already open. But how do we reach the broader Catholic communion and really tell that story of restorative justice that aligns with synodality, that aligns with Catholic social teaching, that aligns with the healing power of Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit. I think the potential of this work to bring positive ripple effects is tremendous. Your question is going to invite me to think more creatively, and I'd love to do that thinking with our IRJH advisory board. How do we spread the word? And so I almost, like you, I almost never say no to an opportunity to talk about restorative justice. It's challenging sometimes for my colleagues at the Basilica because I've been in out in California and Washington D.C. and other places when I've been asked to be on panels and in conferences to have the opportunity to spread the word. But let's keep thinking creatively and see what the Holy Spirit serves up. And Monique, I thank you for your prophetic ministry, for all the work that you've done generously, putting forward your abundant gifts to build up the church, to help heal the church, and to help heal lives. And I look forward to working with you for many years to come. And thank you for being on one of our first episodes of our new BasiliCAST. And if you could keep us in prayer, and we will do the same for the work that lies ahead for you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
God bless you.